Hello and welcome to the first episode of Bookie The Beano, where we discuss the debits and credits of being a bookkeeper or an accountant. I'm Kane Munro, founder of Accountancy Online and Active Outsourcing, and with me, as always, is Diane Lucas, superstar bookkeeper and owner of Direct Management. Hello, Diane.
Hello there, Kane.
Now, you're an award-winning bookie or bookkeeper, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
How many awards have you won now?
Ooh, in recent times I've won 4 Bookkeeper of the Year awards, Kane.
I have seen your email footer, Diane. It barely fits on my page, so I think you're being a little bit modest about your awards. But
I'd have to shrink them down a bit and make them a little bit more accessible than hey?
I like it. Oh, today we're going to talk about the relationship between accountants and bookkeepers, and I guess there's the way that some people perceive accountants and bookkeepers interact, and then there's the real way that accountants and bookkeepers interact as well. But we'll probably touch on both of them. But first, tell me, as a bookkeeper, what do you, in your role, do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, that's changed over time. In current days, I actually don't do that much hands-on bookkeeping, whereas I have a team that does a lot of that sort of work for me. But I'm the one who's there to generate the income or the sales, that pipeline that we all need to have. But also a lot of consultancy work, which is another aspect of bookkeeping that a lot of people probably don't focus on. So my day-to-day, in simple answer, is variable each and every day.
I think everyone in the profession or any profession has a variable day these days. As an accountant, we're much the same. We do all sorts of bits and bobs, and there's sort of an area where accountants and bookkeepers overlap and kind of interact with regards to client work as well. I always thought it was a two sort of circle Venn diagram where there was an accountant, a bookkeeper, and the middle bit would be where you sort of interact and deal with the client. But you introduced the theory of a third aspect to which I hadn't thought of.
Yeah, that's right. So my view is of this Venn diagram. So if you picture 3 interlocking circles, you've got this one little sweet spot right in the centre, which I call the synergy. And that's where the accountant, the bookkeeper, and the most important, the client relationship all is working together in harmony.
But that's often where there's a turf war between what accountants and what bookkeepers do as well. And traditionally, as an accountant, a lot of accountants, which I speak to, look down on bookkeepers for no real reason. There's sort of they look down their nose at a bookkeeper as a sort of a lesser professional, which I don't agree with. And we've discussed this a number of times previously about how a really important part of any client is actually having a really good bookkeeper. Do you have much experience with accountants thumbing their nose at what you do?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and certainly, in years past that would have been the case. And I definitely remember having one of those aha moments when I realised that an accountant is another form of professional, and I'm a bookkeeper who is also equally professional and has different skill sets. And when I actually realised that my skill set is something that is complementary, that's when I realised that accountants weren't scary buggers anymore, and that they really needed that relationship was something that needed to be worked on. When an accountant has that sort of belittling tone to them, whether it's an email or voice or whatever, then I'm very quick to correct.
Yeah, do you run into that much these days? So you mentioned before, it may not happen as much these days, but do you still run into it every now and again, an accountant who
Absolutely. I had a new client who at the time was a prospect and introduced via email me to the accountant, and she asked for my resume.
Your resume?
Yes, my resume. So I went, well, actually, if you'd like to look me up on LinkedIn, or if you'd like to read our website, I'm sure you'll see all the answers you need. I'm actually, running a business, a professional business. I don't have a resume. I thought that was absolutely extraordinary.
I don't know anyone who has a resume anymore, full stop. Maybe when you're entering a graduate sort of position, you may.
So maybe she misunderstood that the client was engaging a bookkeeping firm as opposed to an employee type person.
Yeah, so it is rare, though. It's rarer now that you get sort of questioned about what you can do. And how do you fit in with what an accountant does? Because I know accountants have a lot of accountants are set in their ways and the way they do things, and a lot of accountants now are trying to bring bookkeeping in-house as well, which I don't agree with. Having done some bookkeeping in my time, there's a completely different skill set of being a bookkeeper and being an accountant, and if you try to do both, you end up not pleasing anybody. So how does that go with regards to the skill set and people trying to bring bookkeeping in-house as accountants?
Well, we've lost a couple of clients in the last probably 2 years. Nothing too major, and I do hear that other bookkeepers lose a lot more. I really believe that a really solid accountant-bookkeeper relationship is one that works, who has mutual respect, mutual understanding as to who does what, and at the end of the day, we have that and wholly the client's interests at heart. So, with our best client accountant relationships, our clients respect what we do in regards to software implementation, software training, simplification of business processes, all those sort of things. And then we also do bookkeeping.
Yeah, so this is that Venn diagram that we're talking about. There's a lot of those things intersect what accountants do as well. Like accountants can set up systems and can do X and Y for a client as well. So to me, it's really important to have a working relationship with the client's bookkeeper, or if the client needs a bookkeeper, rather than trying to do it yourself as an accountant, which inevitably you'll stuff it up, that you engage a bookkeeper to look after that client as well. Maybe the right way forward is actually to put some definition around who does what for the client at the start of an engagement.
I was going to say, and each bookkeeper is not the same as the way I run my practice. So, those sort of things that I've just outlined, some bookkeepers might include them in their bookkeeping service list. And if they are actually labelling them as bookkeeping, then they're probably undervaluing the services they're actually providing, which is another bugbear of mine anyway. But if you're a bookkeeper who's providing basic services in regards to compliance-based activities only, data coding, those sort of things, well, that's a different story again. And that's traditionally probably a view that an accountant would have of a bookkeeper.
Yeah, and I think that may have been what's been passed down from generation to generation of an accountant, is that traditional bookkeeping model instead of what bookkeepers have evolved to now, which is a key part of any business's advisory panel.
I've been involved in BNI a few times in recent years, and I no longer am. Mainly because, BNI, for those people who don't understand or don't know it, is a Business Networking International, or whatever the I stands for, I can't remember now. I
always wondered about the I as well.
Yeah, it relies on having one of each type of industry. So you have one accountant, one bookkeeper in your particular BNI chapter. And for someone like myself, it only works well if the accountant is someone that you can work with. And so I had a pretty ordinary experience in one chapter where the accountant didn't see eye to eye with the way I ran a business, because I don't run a traditional bookkeeping business. He wanted to do all the implementations and the training and all those sort of things, and I was just supposed to be the one picking up the data coding, and I don't work that way. So then that was the end of that BNI.
Yeah, we've had some really odd conversations with bookkeepers and networking things where we've been talking to a mutual prospect, I guess you'd call it, where you inevitably go to these things and there's a couple of lawyers and a couple of accountants and a couple of bookkeepers and a couple of consultants, whatever consultants do, and we'd be talking to potentially somebody who we could all service in some way and have a conversation. A bookkeeper saddled up to us once and was like, we're talking and like, I'm a bookkeeper, we're very different to accountants. I'm like, yeah, of course you're very different to accountants. Like we just have a different skill set. And it's important to understand what each person's skill set is, and every bookkeeper and bookkeeping firm has a different skill set to different accountants and accounting firms. So if you interact with, be it as a bookkeeper interacting with accountants or an accountant interacting with bookkeepers, understanding who you're dealing with and what that person's skill set is really important to ultimately get the best result for the client, because that's all that matters.
And interestingly, in that light, we've had situations where the BAS, those sort of things have been lodged by the accountant, and then when I actually review the file, I pull holes in the file and in the submissions that have been made and things, and I'll ask the question, who's lodged these? Oh, the accountant's lodged these. Okay, well, there's a few little, errors perhaps that could be addressed. It's just a really interesting one, because I found out later when after the business then handed over the BAS lodgements and things to us being BAS agents, because we review and thoroughly train and then educate on best practice bookkeeping, so that the client, when he does his own bookwork, is doing the right things. The accountant actually got rather annoyed that we took that business off them. And it's just really an interesting one, because there's a difference between a BAS agent and a tax agent. Yeah. And we have, as you said, a different skill set. So, we don't let anything go through when we're signing off on a BAS that we haven't verified and actually, deeply investigated. Yeah,
inevitably, if a client leaves an accountant or a bookkeeper, it's because they're unhappy with the relationship or the service. It actually has nothing to do with, the next person along. It's because you as an accountant or bookkeeper has not serviced that particular client in the right way. So they've gone to find somebody else. pointing the finger at, whoever's then taken the business is not the right attitude, because inevitably you have to look yourself in the mirror and go, okay, I didn't do the best I could have done in that engagement, and move on to find the next client. But
yeah, that's a yes and no, because in other circumstances, so if we go back to accounting firms taking on bookkeeping divisions or whatever, a lot of that becomes price based. So the accounting firm is then reaching out to the client, the mutual client, who then says, well, this is what you're paying to XYZ bookkeeper firm, and if we bring it all in-house, then you're going to pay ABC amount. And this is an interesting one, because my view on that one is, if the client is fully price conscious, then there are aspects about the delivery of what the bookkeeping firm is actually doing that, as you said, you need to have a good hard look at yourself as well. Because if you were providing the value that they were hoping for or wanting, then they become sticky.
Yeah.
They're not going to leave. I mean, the price would have to be extremely, in their favour if they wanted to leave, if you were providing really, really good service and value to them. So it is a hard one. They will leave based on price, but they will also stay and pay a good premium price if they perceive the value is there.
Well, talking about price and value and things like that, I know you're very big on value pricing, which I know we'll discuss in subsequent episodes, but just to kind of break down accountants and bookkeepers, I remember when I started as a graduate, I was 21, I think I had hair down to my ears at this point of time. I might have had 1 or 2 piercings, and I started at a mid-tier accounting firm in Melbourne. My charge-out rate to clients was over $100 an hour. I spent my first 4 weeks photocopying, and not even photocopying A4 to A4, photocopying B5 to sort of A4. So I had to be in front of the photocopier pretty much for 8 hours a day.
That's a highly technical skill, Kane.
Yeah, well, B5 I think it was to A4. It does. It takes some flicking. It was very fragile paper, so I could have specialised in photocopying at that point of time.
At over $100 an hour.
At $100 an hour, charged out to a client to do that. So the value that accountants sometimes put on their own skill set and services are way overinflated what their reality is.
Which is another bugbear of mine, as well, as we will talk in subsequent things. But when you consider that a charge out from an accounting firm for a skill like photocopying, as good challenging as it could be, that's right. And then you have bookkeepers who charge themselves out at $40 an hour. That's just really quite terrifying to think that they think that that's all they're worth.
Okay, so there's bookkeepers out there who charge themselves out at $40 an hour. I was being charged out for sort of $100 plus an hour for photocopying. Surely there's a level of transparency within, I guess, what people charge out and what people do that a client needs to see as well.
Well, that's an interesting way of looking at it too. One of the aspects that I really am passionate about is regarding the accounting firms who have bookkeeping divisions and those obviously independent practices like myself. When one of my big concerns is the level of transparency within the accounting firm with regard to keeping the bookkeeping aspects separate from the accounting aspects, because as we've already said, they are separate skills. And we have separate qualifications, we have separate skill sets, and they're compatible and not necessarily mutually exclusive either. But when a bookkeeping division is brought in-house, does that necessarily provide the level of transparency required in order to make sure that each is separately held accountable? So, for example, when we look at a client's file, say at the end of financial year, and we then do an alignment, so we're looking at what we've done versus what the accountants then provided at year end, we'll look for the anomalies and either we'll make corrections accordingly and learn to understand where those changes have come from and why, or we'll actually challenge the accountant on, how did $130,000 worth of materials suddenly get introduced into this P&L?
And how do you go challenging an accountant on things like that?
We actually send them an email and say, these are the areas that we have in query. Would you please like to account for where these figures have come from?
It's a very open relationship you have with some of your accountants. I'm assuming those accountants will be very very helpful in providing adjusting journals back to you as a bookkeeper as well, so the client files up to date.
Oh, you're so funny.
that used to be the only function of an accountant, was that you'd take what the bookkeeper or whoever was looking after the books had done, you'd pass adjusting journals, and then you'd have a set of financials. And then my understanding was you always gave adjusting journals back to the bookkeeper or who was ever looking after the file, so their file would be up to date. So that's what I've always done, but it doesn't happen.
How old are you, Kane? You must be one of these ex-generational, 70 years old.
I'm 39.
Adjusting journals, indeed.
So that doesn't happen anymore. So no one gives you adjusting journals to actually put back into the client file?
We actually don't even ask for adjusting journals because we create our own. We ask for a trial balance at the least. Typically we'll get financials, a full set of financials where we extract the information ourselves, and then, as I said, we go back saying we want seeking clarification on these things.
Has that changed with cloud ledgers and single ledger, as they call it now, where the accountants are doing some of their work inside what you call a bookkeeping file or the client file in the cloud?
Yes and no. I mean, we've got some accountants who work within the software, which is fantastic, and they'll do their own adjustments. And we've got one accountant who uses our password on all of their client files because she knows what it is and things. And we've taught her how to use the software and things, and she is very happy to do work within the program. But at the same time too, we then ask for a copy of the financials, the balance sheet and P&L, so that we can archive those and use those for comparisons in the subsequent years to make sure that everything is still hunky-dory when it comes to the following year. And then, of course, you've got other accountants who just generally don't provide you with anything unless you jump up and down and ask for it many, 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 many times. Many,
many, many times. And even then they would still reluctant to hand over because almost like you're judging their work in some respect or something like that.
Well, that's right. And the same sort of thing, it comes, so the question I would have for you then, really, Kane, is the same sort of thing. Is if I'm, as a bookkeeper, asking for clarification on some interesting entries that have been made at year end, is that seen as a challenge? Is that seen as a questioning of your credibility or whatever? I mean, at the end of the day, we're seeking to understand what has happened and can we do better so that we can improve the subsequent year to make sure that if it's something that we've done incorrectly, that we can then work towards improving.
Yes, so we're always happy to provide adjusting journals, and we do a lot of single ledger work where we work inside the client software. So the journals will always be there for the bookkeeper or the client to look at. I certainly don't have any issue with being pulled up with anything we may have done wrong. I know a lot of accountants who may get a hump with that. The only thing I kind of get the hump about is the fact that I have to spend time in answering a question potentially where the answer may already be obvious. If it is something which is really unclear, then always happy to help clarify that, because ultimately making sure the client and the bookkeeper understand what we've done is part of that ongoing relationship between the three of us.
You're a lovely accountant then,
well,
aren't you?
I just don't understand that whole, somebody's asked for something.
Us and them.
Yeah, the us and them. There's no us and them. That's a Pink Floyd song.
Exactly.
That may be showing a little bit of my age now, but it's more a collaborative thing where we're all pushing in the same direction.
Well, we should be. Ultimately, that's what we should be doing. And so this is another one of a query is in those sort of situations. As I said, ultimately, what we're seeking to do is to understand why these adjustments have been made. And one, is it something that we can improve on? Or two, is it something we need to talk to the client about? Or is it just simply a creation? And if it is just simply a creation, well, that has its own concerns in itself.
Fictitious accounting.
That's right. And so I will raise those things with the client to sort of say, make them fully aware of what they're signing off on, and to have that discussion with the accountant. And it's an interesting discussion at the end of the day when that happens. You'll have, typically in those circumstances, the client say, well, this is what I pay the accountant for.
So you'll actually communicate things back to the client that I would think an accountant generally would around, you're making somebody's made tax disappear, which is actually impossible. And then you're the one sort of having that communication with the client around, listen, you're the one who's responsible for this, not the accountant.
That's right. So I'll, if I see that sort of thing, then I'll seek to understand that the client actually understands what has happened here. Are you aware that, these sort of adjustments have been made on your behalf and the subsequent potential consequences of those?
Wow, that's great. Is it the same with tax? Do you have a lot of conversations with clients around, more around BAS being due at the end of a quarter?
Yeah, of course. I mean, as in what, the dollar value behind it?
Yeah, that's my most hated conversation with clients.
Yeah,
You get to the end of a quarter, especially around Christmas, if they're in sort of a retail industry or an industry where you're flat out before Christmas and then after Christmas you have a lull. That communication in sort of late January when they're hopefully still on holidays and listen, your tax debt's sort of 80 grand. I hate having those conversations. So I'd love to have somebody look up.
That's one part of our process. If we're actually engaged in a bookkeeping package with a business, then part of our process is to keep them aware of their ongoing obligations. So we have what we call an obligations sheet that is filled out monthly, and it's for the pre-figures that we're expecting. So PAYG withholding, super, GST, all those sort of things, get pulled into this report that we actually provide, so that if they read it, they're not having any surprises, because they're being kept in the loop as to what to expect 3 months down the track when the BAS is due, because they're being kept in the loop each month.
I think that's the most important takeaway that anyone can take away from listening to this. Accountants out there, engage a really good bookkeeper on behalf of your client, or work with the bookkeeper they've got and try to get the right result out of it, because I'd love to have a bookkeeper doing a lot of that stuff for some of our clients where they don't have an existing bookkeeper who does that sort of thing. So if you find a good bookkeeper out there, accountants or clients, latch onto them, and highly recommend Di and her team at Direct Management.
But also, that's the same thing. If you find a great accountant, latch on to them, because there has to be that freedom of speech. There has to be the ability there to connect with the accountant. I mean, the best accountants we work with are ones that we can email. If we've got something that comes up and we're really...
Or WhatsApp or Slack or...
Yeah, any of the communication tools, that's right. But, and the response time that we have, because pretty much those accountants know that if we're asking a question, there's a darn good reason to it. We're not there to kill their time. We're there actually to, find out something quickly, because we need to, action it then and there on the spot with the client or whatever it is. But, we're talking together consistently about that particular client, or even in a new engagement. Say, for example, something recently happened last week. It was a referral from one of the accounting firms we work with, and I did spoke with the prospect, had a Zoom call in with onto the software, and within 5 minutes picked massive holes in their file. And interestingly, the bookkeeper they engaged is not necessarily a qualified bookkeeper. So it's somebody who's, calling themselves a bookkeeper who doesn't have the necessary skill set, and it shows. And so I just wrote a quick email back to the accountant saying thanks for the referral. First quick look, there's a stack of issues with this file. These are my recommendations. How do you want to proceed?
Yeah. So it's that level of respect. Level of respect between the accountant and the bookkeeper is really important for the end client. And it's okay to pull up the bookkeeper or the accountant. Again, you have to be open and transparent and be accountable to... Everyone's accountable to the client. Bookkeeper, accountant, we're all accountable.
Which is interesting, because with that particular one, I'm meeting with that prospect this week coming, but I said to her, look, all the things that I've picked holes in predominantly can be templated. To me, it looks like ignorance. It's not necessarily something that they're deliberately doing wrong. It's just general ignorance, and I can template for those, and I can educate for those. How open do you think that bookkeeper is going to be to my teaching them? And the prospect actually said, well, if she's not, we're looking for a new bookkeeper.
There you go. Exactly right. Can't agree with you more, Di. It's, again, just do your job, guys. If you're an accountant, just do your job. If you're a bookkeeper, just do your job. If they overlap, just have the general level of respect and conversation you would with any other human being to get that right.
And keep in mind the end result. What are we working for?
The client.
Absolutely.
That's all today for Bookie and the Beano.
Diane being the bookie.
And Kane being the Beano. We'll be back soon with another episode of Bookie and the Beano. See you then.
Bye.